Well, hello quilty friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be filming the second video in my series called Simply Squares. So this is what we're going to be making, this 8-inch block right here, and we're going to be using 2.5-inch squares. The first video in the series, although I didn't call it that at the time, was I filmed this last month when we just used 2.5-inch squares to make these autumn patchwork blocks that go on the border of my scarecrow quilt that, you know, we're right in the middle of the sew along right now. But I had told you then in that video that I had cut a bunch of squares. Here, let me put this out of the way. That I had cut a bunch of squares out of my autumn fabric. So here's my autumn collection right here. So there's 42 prints and then there's 10 backgrounds. And so I took a fat quarter of all the prints and cut a bunch of 2.5-inch squares. And then I decided, because of this block, it's kind of I like the strong contrast between the background and the color, that I'm not going to be using these two prints because obviously that would not have enough contrast with the background. And I thought it was maybe too strong to use as the background. And then this one I was kind of on the fence with. I mean, it does have some contrast, but it's pretty light. And then as I was doing the quilty math, I thought I really only need 40 different prints, and so I decided to not use these for this quilt. So I don't know if you really needed that information, but giving it to you anyway. So here are the 10 backgrounds cut into squares. I've got to cut more, but this is what I'm down to at this point. And here's all the 2.5-inch squares that I keep in this bin. And so when I'm getting ready to make this block, all I do is grab over here, let's see, over here. All I do is grab 12 prints and 12 backgrounds, okay, for one block. And so then I separated them into 8 here and 8 here, and that's what I'm going to begin to sew with. And these are the ones that I set aside to do the easy corner triangles on the block, because what we're going to do first is, you know, if you follow my quilting and how I like to sew things, I'm going to be sewing these into 4 patches first and then adding the easy corner triangles after. And so 8 of the print, 8 of the background, we're going to be doing 4 patches, and then these I just simply, I normally, again, don't mark a line because I don't need to, because of my Seam So Easy guide, but I have found for filming that it helps people to see, you know, where I'm sewing and marking a line. And for those of you who like to mark the line, you know, then go ahead. And so what I did was on 4 of the backgrounds and 4 of the prints, I mark a line from corner to corner. Okay, so that's what's going to happen with those. And so I'm just going to go ahead, bring this over here. I've got a block in front of me because I kind of like to look at, you know, what I'm doing so I can kind of keep things going right. So I'm sewing here using a 1/4-inch seam allowance on my vintage featherweight. Here. There we go. And I just like to chain piece this block, and I'm usually sewing 4 blocks at a time. But this one is a pretty good block to sew just one at a time, because there is quite a bit of chain piecing in it that you don't have to do as many at a time. But I don't know, I like to choose like 4 colors and then just do all of the 4 patches first and then do all the easy corner triangles. I'm going to grab some glasses so I can see a little bit better. So I use my stitchy readers in different strengths depending on how tired my eyes are, what time of the day it is, and they're really just magnification. You know, they're not prescription, they're just magnification. And I find that for different tasks, I like different strengths. These pink ones that I just put on are 3s, and I usually use those for crochet. I'm going to switch these out and see. I think they're a little bit strong for me right now. I must not have tired eyes yet. And then most of the time I use my red ones. And I just like the fact that I can see a little bit closer what I'm doing. Okay, so then instead of using my bonus piecing in between for filming, I'm just using a scrap piece of fabric, and then I just cut these apart. I thought this series would be really fun because it's just so fun to just use squares or rectangles or something, meaning it's all the same cutting, because you know, as we know, that it takes time to cut a quilt too. And sometimes if you're just cutting all of the same thing, or you have like a fat quarter bundle hanging around that you don't know what you want to do with it, sometimes it's just nice to have a pattern in mind that they're all squares, and you can just grab your fat quarters, stack them 4 at a time, which is what I do when I'm cutting fat quarters. I press them, and I do starch my fabric before I cut, and what I do is half Mary Ellen's Best Press and half water in a spray bottle. And I use a spray bottle. I don't put that in my iron because I always use a vintage iron, a dry iron. And what I'll do is I'll just water it down half and half. You can do it a little bit stronger if you want to, and I don't really measure. I just kind of, you know, fill half the spray bottle, and then with the Best Press, and then water. And I just like how that puts a little bit of sizing back into the fabric, but I like my fabric to be a little bit so that it still has some give, so it still feels like cotton fabric, so that it's not real stiff. And because then when I'm piecing, I can kind of make it do what I need it to do. And so, all right, so you saw that I pressed my seams open. I'm pressing all of my seams open in this block. You can see here, let's turn it around this way. Okay, and it helps it to lie nice and flat. And then, let's see. And then what I do, bring them over to the machine like this, set them up this way, so all of the prints are going the same way, and then flip them over like this, throw them back here on my design board so that I am not going to make a mistake as I'm sewing together, because sometimes, you know, I'm doing other things, I'm visiting, I'm talking, or whatever. When I'm sewing this way, I can just grab what I need to grab and not have to worry. Now you can pin if you want to, but I usually start at the corners, make sure this lines up, and just hold it down. And this is what I mean by I like my cotton to have a little bit of give still, so that I can manipulate it, you know, how I need it to match up with those seams. Okay. So when I do pin, I use my double pins, and I put on the seams, 1 pin on each side of the seam, which I've shown you before. And we are right in the middle of reproducing those double pins. They've been hard to get, and so we have, you know, found another source, and I'm happy to say that those double pins will be coming back out again. I've had a lot of you ask me where to find them. And so I'm happy to say they'll be available at quilt shops pretty soon. I'm not sure the date. I probably should have looked that up so I could tell you, but I can't remember. But it is on Riley Blake's website if you really, you know, needed to know the date. So, okay, so now I'm down to the 4 patches. Come over here, give them a quick press. I like to set the seams. I like to see how it's kind of wavy right here. I like to just put my iron on there and set those seams. And so what that does is puts the bobbin seam and the top thread seam kind of squished together nicely like a sandwich, and it just kind of helps your blocks to lie flat. And then I will usually open my blocks like this, and now that I have seams that cross each other like an intersection like this, what I'll do with these is take my roller and right at that intersection, I'm going to make sure that's flat, and see, that really helps to open that up all the way. So it's not flat yet until I you know, use the iron to press. But by using this pressure on this, and because it is straight, it's helping to open that up all the way. And now I can just put my iron on top. Pressing your quilt blocks is really an important step. You know, it's not, cutting is an important step to cut accurately and everything, but sometimes we forget about the pressing part and how important that is to keep your blocks accurate. And so I like to apply heat there, and then clappers to make that flat. And then I'm just gonna let them cool down for just a second. And then I'm gonna lay these here, get these ready to go, and do the easy corner triangles. So I'm gonna let those, you know, cool under the clapper for a minute. But what I'm gonna do is, on 2 of them, I'll be using the dark squares, and on 2 of them, I'll be using the light squares, and it doesn't matter which one I start out on, so maybe I'll just grab the dark one, and I'm going to add an easy corner triangle on to the background. And so this is why I like to mark my lines, so you can see where you're sewing right here. But if I'm not marking, which I normally do not when I'm filming, I don't need to, because I've got this center line here to follow. And I just start sewing in the corner right here. And I follow this corner along this line. And by following that, I'm just sewing right on the line that I had marked anyway. So, okay, and so I'll do the dark ones at the same time. Grab those, line that up. And that's important too, that these are all lined up right here. So if you're going to make a bunch of these blocks and you are a person that likes to mark your lines, then, you know, I just grab a design board and put all the, you know, set up your blocks and just grab your little mat and your pencil and just mark a bunch of them so they're all pre-marked, so that you don't have to stop and mark them each time individually as you're making the blocks. That seems to slow down my sewing, and I don't like that. I like to just enjoy what I'm doing and sew each step of the way. So for me, I like to be a little bit prepared that way, but you know, that's kind of my favorite way. That doesn't mean it has to be yours, of course. All right, so those are sewn. I'm going to grab these other ones. Now I've got the light squares left, and I'm just going to do the same thing. Make sure that I line it up. Sew from corner to corner. Now, while I've got that one under there, I'm going to go ahead and put these under the clapper. So I'm going to press that. I like to use larger scissors to just trim these off approximately a 1/4 inch seam. They're already sewn, so it doesn't have to be exact. You can use your rotary cutter and, you know, a little mat at this stage if you want to, but I don't know, I like to cut with scissors. So it just comes from growing up, I guess, in a quilting family, and we used scissors all the time back then because, of course, we didn't have rotary cutters or anything, and so that's what we were used to. Okay, so with this, I'm going to use that roller to open those seams where those intersect there, the ends, and to get those a little bit flatter. And then I'll go ahead and just apply my iron, make sure everything is flat underneath there. And my iron is good and hot, but not hot enough that it's going to scorch it. I do love to use my vintage irons because they're hot. And if you're wondering about vintage irons and how I choose which ones to use and which ones not to use, then I will leave a link here in this video. I leave that link here, you know, in most of my videos because I'm always getting questions about them. Because I have a video that I did when I started my channel in the very beginning on my irons, how I make my ironing board covers, and how I find irons and shop for vintage irons and which ones I use, which ones I stay away from, and why, and all that stuff. So I'll leave that. Whoops. I need to push this over here a little bit. Got this on my little base. And I pulled it closer to me for filming, but I'm not used to it being this close to me. Okay, so I'm going to leave those to cool and then continue on adding these light ones. wanted to show this block to you from start to finish instead of having some of the segments sewn already like I do before, just because I wanted to show you how fast and easy it is and how fun it is to just sew with just squares and what you can create. So I'm gonna have fun with this series, I think, of just showing you different blocks, traditional, you know, some traditional, whatever, just squares. You know, these first two, of course, we're using 2.5-inch squares, but that doesn't mean I'm always going to stick with 2.5-inch squares. It just depends on what mood strikes me. If I want to stick with 2.5-inch squares for a while, then we'll do that, and I will just show you different blocks and talk about the quilts that I'm going to make with them and what I'm doing with them. And so when I get this block sewn together, I'll show you a little bit more and talk to you about what I'm going to do with these blocks and the size of quilt that I'm going to make, give you possibilities on, you know, the size that you can make. You can simply make table runners, but, or, you know, pillows or whatever you choose to do. But that's what's fun about this series. I want to be able to give you the freedom to, you know, be the boss of your own quilt and decide. You can make yours exactly like something I'm doing, or you can do it completely different and make a quilt to fit a bed, or, you know, for a gift, or whatever you're doing. But I think this will be a fun series so that you can delve into your stash. You can do scrappy if you want. You can still use your 2.5-inch strips to make these. You just need to grab a strip that's long enough that you can cut 12 matching squares. And, you know, sometimes I'll do blocks that have several different prints in them. And sometimes I like to do blocks that are just using 2 prints in each one. Okay, set that over there so I can have room here for this one. And I really like this little block. I'm calling it the Harvest Block because I think it's a cute name, and I'm using my autumn collection, and so it kind of makes sense. But I think this is a classic block that can be used in, you know, in any prints, any collection that you might have around that you've been wanting to use. And I'm going to end up making this quilt for my bed so I can have a little fall, I shouldn't say little, so I can have a fall quilt for my bed. Okay, so I'm going to use these clappers again, but because these are still warm on the underside, because I had just used them, I'm going to make sure that I turn them over. And so the clappers, if you haven't used these before, they're just going to absorb the heat, and then they have some weight to them as well, so they're helping these blocks to end up being flat. And so these are Riley Blake Designs clappers, and I like how that looks. And then I did, since I've been sewing these blocks, I've got this trimmer out. So this is my, well, I call it a trimmer is my shortcut, but for my trim it rulers here. And see, I like to lay that on there and see if there's any problems, if there's anything sticking out that I need to trim off or anything like that. And all the lines going diagonal this way and straight in 1/2-inch increments help you to line that up and see if something's a little too big. If sometimes when you're doing easy corner triangles, some might stick out at the end if it wasn't exactly, you know, sewn from point to point, something like that. So a lot of the times I don't even use it to trim because I don't need to, but it just kind of is my insurance. I like to just lay it on there and make sure, yeah, that looks good, everything's going the right way, and I don't have to worry about it. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here and lay this block out. And when I'm laying these blocks out to sew together, you know, it can get confusing because they kind of look the same. So when I'm laying them out, I remember that the corners, the easy corner triangles, are in the outside corners and in the center. Okay, so that's how I'm laying this one out. Okay, so they're going to be the ones with the dark backgrounds now with these cute little bow ties or hourglass, whatever you want to call it. Look, so that's how I'm going to lay them, and they're going this direction. Now that these are cool, again, I'm not going to lay this like this with the corner, with the full squares. I'm going to turn it so that I've got the easy corner triangles on the outsides and the inside. So it's going to form this little pattern on the inside. Now that's the way that I'm sewing this block together and this quilt together. But you know, there's always options. You can turn them however you want to, just as long as they're turned the same way. You might decide that you want to make your block like this. Now I'm gonna remind me, Cass, to turn it back before I sew it together. You might decide that you totally want to do it this way, and look what happens. Look what you got going on there. Now you've got a little star. Okay, so it just depends on what you want to do, and that's what's so fun with sewing these little blocks just with 2.5 inch squares and kind of traditional pieces, so you can turn them and have them however you want. But that's how mine is going to be sewn together. Okay, so I'm just simply going to put right sides to right sides. I like to line this up right here where this diagonal line is. Because I've pressed open, I can really line those up right on top of each other and hold that with my finger, and then I just begin sewing. I keep holding it there till I sew over to that point, and then I just line up at the corner and continue going. And then do the same thing with the other half. See, this is what I mean by I like to have a little bit of give. Make sure that I just line those up, make sure they're lined up on the edge, and I just kind of manipulate that and make it line up. I guess my fingers are the pins instead. I personally just don't like to use pins because I don't think I need to take that much time to use pins when I can just manipulate it myself as I'm going under the machine. I only worry about the next seam that's coming along, and you know, that's just kind of how I do it. All right, I'm gonna clear these clappers back here a little bit farther. Set those seams. Now these previous seams that I've pressed open may not be quite as flat as I normally get them because I did not leave them, you know, under the clappers as long as I usually do, to let them completely cool down. And you know, because of filming, I don't want you to just be waiting and watching. Just, it's kind of like watching paint dry, right? You don't want to just watch a block under the clapper cool down. So just know that these seams will be much flatter like this. So I'm going to put these long ones down here for weight. I'm going to apply a little bit more heat right there, and then put these over here on top. And sometimes I like to just add, if I've got them sitting right here, I like to use a lot of clappers, and I like it for the weight. I just feel like that it helps, you know, keep them flatter. And so I'm going to let those cool down before I sew that together into a block. But I have these laid out here on this board because I wanted to show you, because I was talking about how I'm setting my quilt. And as you saw in the opening video on my design wall, I did, you know, I had them all laid out how I was going to sew them into the quilt, which is just like this, how I showed you how these are all in the corners, the half square triangles, and then the half square triangles meet up in the center to make this design. Okay, so when I lay the blocks out, the dark part is always in the top left corner and the bottom left corner. All right, and so that's how that looks. And you saw on the design wall, you know, the secondary pattern that forms, and that looks really cool. But I wanted to show you, I did take a couple of pictures, so look close in the slideshow again. The last couple of pictures are a different setting that you could twist them if you wanted to. So I do have these two in the corners right here. But let's see, how do I explain that? So all right, maybe compare them like this. So this blue block and this orange block is the same, but the green and the red block is not. See how, I gotta have my hands free so I can point. So see how this corner is the background? this is still in the corner, but it's the colored background. So I twisted those and I twisted those. So in the middle, see, you've got two background here and the two prints here. Now you've got four here in the middle. And so that forms a completely different secondary pattern when you're sewing these blocks together. And what I mean by secondary pattern is I'm not putting sashing in between these blocks. And so it just forms a different pattern when you've got all of these blocks together. Sometimes your eye gets lost and you don't know which one, where the block stops and starts. And I really like that. I think that's interesting to do that way. So I just wanted to give you an option. I just decided one way I'm going to do it, and that's how I'm going to do it. But, you know, you can put sashing in between. But what I love about this block is I call it, if you followed me in my quilting videos before and stuff, I call this a one block wonder, where you don't have to use any sashings and you can just simply make a bunch of blocks. And I know that they'll finish at 8" and so that helps me when I'm doing my quilty math and deciding what I want to do. And I just sew them together, and if I want 10 blocks across, and because it's an 8" block, then I know that it's going to finish at 80 inches. Okay, so that's how I'm going to sew that block together with the heavy part right up here, heavy, dark, however you want to say it, the background. And then I'm just going to put that together, bring it over to the machine, and I'm going to start by lining those up right there on the diagonal, how I showed you before, just when I did the single blocks, little sections together. Sew to that point, and then line up the next seam. Make sure that looks good. Okay. Then I'm going to, whoops, I forgot to trim that first little starter and stopper off. And then I've just got these 3 little intersections to press down. And because this is my last pressing of this block, I will press it again. Make sure I've got that heat on there. And then apply those clackers again and let that cool down. Put the weight on it again. And so now I'm going to talk about a little bit of quilty math. So what I'm going to do, let's see, in my notes here, let me bring this book over. This is my current book. I got a new book coming out in November, but this is my current book that I'm working with. And in the back, I've got all kinds of cutting charts and things like that. And this tells you how many squares you can get from a fat quarter, how many squares you can get from a width of fabric, how many strips of the width of fabric, sizes that you can get from a yard of fabric. This really helps you when you're cutting your squares to kind of figure out what you can get out of, you know, your stash that you have. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be making 3 of these blocks out of the same print. Okay, so from 1 fat quarter, I need 36 squares because I'm doing 12 squares per block, and 3 times 12 is 36. I may use the same background with all of them. I may switch them around, but if I make out of 40 prints, and if I make 3 blocks from each one, then that's going to give me 120 blocks. And that's how many I want to do a 10 across by 12 down setting. And that quilt will measure 80 by 96. And I'm not going to put in any sashings or borders or anything around it. I'm just going to, you know, quilt it and bind it. Now, if you wanted to make that many blocks and then buy some yardage and add a border around it, if you want to do that, that's great. But I just decided that's a good average size for me to, to put on my bed or to fold and put at the bottom of my bed. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. I will, in my in the description of this video, I will put, the measurements of the block. I'll put the cutting of the blocks. please take advantage of the description in the video. I put a lot of information in there. I put a lot of links. And so you just need to click on there where it says show more or read more or whatever it says on your device that you're using. It will always say that. And there's just like a first few sentences under the video. I get a lot of questions, so I know a lot of you are not understanding, you know, that you can read that information because you just have, you know, never paid attention to it before because you're just watching the video, which is normal. But most YouTubers will put information on there, so you just have to click on to open the full page. And so that's what this block looks like. This is the harvest block, and it finishes at 8 inches finished when it's sewn in. Of course, it measures 8.5 inches right now. I did not bring in my 8.5 inch trim it ruler, but at this point I usually have it here, and then I will check that too to make sure if there's anything that I need to trim off. You know, I can't see anything that really, you know, glares out, but you could still use this right here. You can see that this is a 1/4 inch on the outside, so you would just line up this. You could test it that way and see how it lines up exactly like that. And so, let's see, I think I've said everything I need to say about this block. I hope that you have enjoyed this video number 2 in this series, and I will come back, I don't know, in a month or something like that, and give you another block in the series. I don't know if it'll be 2.5 inch squares, 1.5, 3.5, or maybe a combination or something, but it is kind of fun working with 2.5 right now, so I might, you know, come up with something different than that. But before I do that, I'm planning in a couple of weeks, hopefully next time that Cass is here to film with me, to do you a little tour of some of the rest of my workrooms that's surrounding here in my sewing loft, and give you a little tour of my sewing area, my new sewing area in my new home that I'm setting up. And of course, I don't know if it'll ever be finished, so I don't think I'll wait to do a video for when it's finished, because when is that? You know, we're always redecorating and moving things around and reorganizing. So anyway, so I hope that you'll join me for that. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll chat with you later.